Okay. I love listening to music while I wait for everybody. And somebody was texting me saying, I love watching Pam dance right now. I'm going to turn off this screen share. And then if we can just start with introductions, I'm going to turn my camera and microphone off while y'all introduce yourselves. And then we'll get into the questions. We only have 3 questions for the panel keynote because there's quite a few of you on the panel, and the questions were developed by the executive board and the student advisory board from WAESN. And then in the last 15 minutes or so, we'll have time for Q&A from the participants. So if you could I have an order. I have Rochelle, Priyanka, Brandon, Pam, Shane, and Dr. Jones, if we can go in that order. So Rochelle.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rochelle Horner. I teach English and History at Eastlake High School. I also am the leader of the equity team there, and I am on the secondary rep for the LWEA, and I lead the equity team there as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Priyanka Makara. I'm a junior at Interlake High School in Bellevue, Washington, and I'm also a member of WAESN's Youth Advisory Board, and I'm so happy to speak to you all today.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shane Baguia. I am a program specialist for advanced learning in Seattle Public Schools. I am also a former school psychologist over at Rainier Beach, again in Seattle Public Schools. I supported some of the work for the special education framework out of Washington Ethnic Studies now. I am also one of the CRE racial equity coaches in Seattle Public Schools as well. And then I do some adjunct teaching over at Seattle University.
What's going on, y'all? My name is Brandon Hersey. I am the school board director for District 7. I serve as vice president of the Seattle School Board, chair of the Audit and Finance Committee. But during the day, I teach 2nd grade down in Federal Way, Washington for the Federal Way Public School District. Thank y'all so much for having me.
Hi, my name is Pamela Johnson, and I'm a paraeducator in the role as Academic and Behavioral Intervention Specialist at Rochester High School. I'm also a member of the WAESN team, and I'm also a WEA and NEA board of directors, so I'm glad to be here.
Good afternoon. My name is Brent Jones, soon to be superintendent of Seattle Public Schools. I'm currently in California, so I appreciate the warm welcome to hear that California love rendition as we start moving into this space. Previously, I was the chief of equity partnerships and engagement, where I was assisting Tracy and other folks to lift up ethnic studies. And so really pleased to be here today with you all.
Thank you. And the purpose of this keynote, is to talk about organizing for ethnic studies at various levels. So y'all represent various levels. And I know Shane served as a principal before, and have you ever been a principal, Brent? I don't even know. No? Okay. So Shane has. And so just the various levels, what does that look like? So if there's no order that's being expected for you to speak in, so if you just have something to say and you have an answer for the question, go ahead and speak up and share what you think. And so a lot of the questions that we came up with were related to how to organize authentically for ethnic studies in institutions that were built on white supremacy. So that's really the foundation for the questions that we're asking. So the first one is, how do you flatten hierarchies or even dismantle them and make room for student leadership and collaboration for ethnic studies?
Well, I can go ahead because I'm a student and the only student on the panel as far as I know. But I think that this question is so incredibly important because a lot of people struggle on how to start with ethnic studies organizing. But to me, in my perspective as a student, the most crucial thing that we need to have in order to organize effectively is to have student voice on the district-wide level, but also on the school-to-school based level. So in the Bellevue School District, I've been working to have student leadership on the school board, which I'm really happy to see some school board members on our panel here today, because having student voice be promoted by a school board is one of the most powerful things that can happen in a school district. And so that's definitely one of the most important things that we need in order to flatten hierarchies. But beyond that, on the school to school level, having student leadership on key crucial school issues is also really important, because the students that attend those specific schools, only they have an insight on the issues and problems faced by that specific school. So having leadership on both the school-wide level, but also the district-wide level, are really integral to flatten those hierarchies. And most importantly, it's really, really crucial that student voice is not only listened to, but empowered. I think that a lot of the times we listen to people's voices, but we don't truly empower them. And students usually tend to be undercut the most because we're so young. People don't really respect our voices as that powerful. But the moment when school boards and school administrators really take our words for something that really needs to happen, something that needs to be changed, only then can we really flatten hierarchies. And so empowering student voice is definitely the first step.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'd like to just listen to you talk about that, for the duration. Student voice is critical and important. And one thing that we know is that hierarchies are bureaucracies, and they exist to stay in existence. And so one thing that we need to do is recognize that. And part of what is important as we look at how do we flatten organizations is really about what you just mentioned around bringing student voice to the table. And in order to do that, we need people that can navigate these systems and can navigate and advocate. And so there are, I'm not saying we need to respect the hierarchy, but we need to respect what it is. And it is, to make it in layman's terms, it is the game that we need to understand. And so one of the things that we need to do is have campaigns that are organized, that we have people who are sponsors that can navigate the various systems, understand the timelines, the deadlines, what are all the policy issues and those type of things. And so I don't know how soon we can flatten organizations or make sure that hierarchies are yield more, again, have a flatter organization. But I do think we can work in voice, and I think we can do that through design. And I'd like to really, lift up Brandon Hershey, who's actually my boss, soon to be boss. And in his seat as a board member, he's learning to how to give students voice and give other people's voice from his seat of power. And so I think those are the places where we need to leverage and access people who are advocates that understand the power structures and know how to share power. So I'll defer to somebody else on here, but I appreciate how our student led off, and I think we need to learn from your wisdom.
Hi, this is Pam, and I would like to speak. I'm the only African American on staff in my school district at Rochester School District, and this year I can honestly say that we started an equity team at the high school, and the district has taken notice on that and how we're doing that. One of the things I'm really proud of is that now we have introduced the student-led committee with our equity team, and listening to the student voice, as our previous student has stated. That's probably one of the most powerful tools that the district and the high school is able to listen to, and we're taking notice on that. And they're also directing our first equity team presentation that we're going to be doing here in 2 weeks. So we're really, really looking forward to that. And one way to really empower that flattening of that hierarchy is we have to have student voice in order to make things change, because of the fact that we as adults, we don't see what they're seeing, what the students are seeing. And listening to their voices, but not more than just listening to their voice, we also have to hear what they're saying. And those are two different things that we often, as educators, don't do a very good job on that. And so I just would like to empower us as educators to look at that, and because that's going to help in flattening the hierarchies as well. So thank you.
Yeah, I just want to connect with what Pamela was saying. Something that I ask all of my students that walk into my classroom is, what does it mean to be a humble scholar? And when I ask them that, I'm not asking that just of them, but I'm asking that of me. And something that we've worked in for our equity training for our staff is, what does that mean when our students say, this curriculum is harmful to me, this thing that you're doing is harmful to me, you not engaging in Black Lives Matter week at school is harmful to me. What does that mean to you? And how do you humble yourself to that feedback and learn from it? And we also started a student equity team. I see in the chat, somebody's asked, like, what are some specific examples for how do you flatten those hierarchies? Making that space, and I really mean making that space outside of, speaking from secondary, outside of the traditional spaces like ASB and leadership, and like we have a Senate. And those are fine spaces, but they are steeped in white supremacy, particularly at schools that are traditionally white, where all of the teachers are white besides me and, you know, my friend here who is online, she's also on the equity team. When you have so few educators of color, the spaces are white. And so the curriculum is white, and those leadership spaces are white, and our BIPOC students don't feel comfortable, they don't feel welcome in those spaces. And you know, this idea of reimagining those spaces is really nice, but many times they're reimagined in a white way because you don't have a teacher leader to help them be different. And so in creating the equity, the student equity team, we created that space that was for them, by them, led by them. And you listen to them, which means they make the initiatives from the beginning. From the start of the equity team, the student equity team last year, we asked them, what do you want? What do you want to do? What information do you need? And it has grown from there. So it's similar to what the keynote speaker said earlier today, is make those spaces, and they have to be outside of the traditional spaces, because the traditional spaces are not made for them, and they were not made for them by design.
Yeah, if I just want to repeat what, similarly what everyone else is saying, how a community is a verb, and that something also Tracy shared with me early on, what Dr. Velez was saying, community is a verb, right? And then Tracy shared with me early on is that, you know, we have to make sure that we're not institutionalized. And I think Dr. Velez gave a lot of examples around that. And then sharing off what the entire panel was saying too, something that I really try to make sure is that, who am I centering on? Am I centering, and we're talking about students, but I always am intentional about if I'm centering on Black, Indigenous, other students of color, and our communities and our families, and our teachers. And then am I doing it in ways of compliance or with action? And so I think about, you know, am I doing things side by side? And then I kind of run through like who's at the table, who's providing input, who's making decisions, and in the very end, who's being celebrated and what are we celebrating? And so I kind of think about those 4 different ways, and who are we centering on? Similarly around the equity teams that I think Rachel, you were sharing out earlier, and Pamela, you as well. And then going alongside what Dr. Velez was saying, I think a lot of and Dr. Jones too, a lot of like the timelines in the institution, the hierarchy, how can we be intentional about action research and participatory research within those frameworks and within the hierarchy and structure, so we can really unpack that to see really what is going on and make intentional moves that way. And I think ultimately, you know, I had actually had my son join the NAACP Youth Council to listen in as a 6th grader, but really have students side by side from the start as we kind of think through what is our curriculum and who is our curriculum centering on to.
Can I just say that, like, I'm already starting to get chills from this panel. I am feeling so lifted up. I couldn't say any of this better than any of the colleagues that have already spoken, but some of the things that I've heard some of these wonderful people say has been student voice, community access, and then especially a centering, right? And, you know, as a teacher and serving on the school board at the same time, my practice in my classroom often, you know, and should affect my decision-making in the boardroom. And so figuring out how do we intertwine our values through curriculum like ethnic studies with our practices and our policy, right? And so that looks like, you know, the recent policy that we just passed that's going to add 3 and hopefully expand someday to 7 student representatives to the Seattle School Board. And I think additionally, as we move forward, as we're having this conversation about centering our students of color, we also need to be having a really solid conversation about centering our educators of color as well, because the experiences that they've had, as many people on this call will be able to tell you firsthand, especially in Seattle public schools, have been ones where, you know, folks have not felt supported, they have not felt protected. And part of ethnic studies makes that space and really makes a clear point to protect what it means to have these types of conversations in an open public forum for everyone to be able to take part in. And so the same tenets that we're teaching, we also need to live by making sure that we are also providing protections for our educators as we are moving forward with thinking about how are we not only implementing this in classrooms, but through our entire system.
Thank you. Okay. And there's lots of questions that popped up, but I'm going to save them for the 15 minutes. I'm recording them in a Google Doc, so I have them for later. The next question is, in your current role in the K through 12 system, how do you help prevent the whitewashing, co-opting, and to quote Marquita Prinzing, #rewhiting of ethnic studies?
Okay, I can go again to start off because I started off on the last question, but I think that as a student, again, I probably have a completely different perspective than the other people on the panel, so I'm looking forward to how you guys are answering this question. But as a student, I think that the most important way that we can really make sure that ethnic studies and the quality and sanctity of ethnic studies persists is restlessness. Like, never be satisfied with what is given to you and continuously push for change. In the Bellevue School District, I have been very, very restless because I know that the district is really reclaimed by white power in the end. And if students like me and students across the state and the country just stay still and don't accept that something needs to be changed, then we won't even be able to really implement ethnic studies in the first place, much less prevent it from being rewritten over and over again. So I would say that the mindset of continuous improvement and restlessness and always looking to make something better is the first and foremost, utmost, most important way that we can really make sure that ethnic studies persists in its most important and unaltered and unwhitewashed form.
I just want to lift that up really quick because that's exactly it. And I think from the perspective of a policy person with the district, one of the things that we do is we adopt curriculum and then we just let it go and say, okay, we're done. This is what you're going to use. And as Priyanka was saying, it really needs to be a living process that has a two-way or however many way feedback system that's continually being improved. Curriculum cannot be a static thing. It has to be living. It has to be breathing. It has to be under continuous review, because the way that we are having conversations and the way that we are giving people access and what we know about how to do those things effectively to make people feel safe is ever advancing and changing. So we need to be in a position to grow with the frame of thought as we are learning things through the process.
Yes, and I just I want to lift up in that we just have to build in time as part of our design to do that continuous improvement. We talk about doing it, but we don't design it. We don't build it in the front end. And so we tend to scramble to go get voice when somebody wakes up and says, oh, I think that would be a good idea. But I think we need to do that in the front end and be intentional about it and be disciplined about our review. And are we whitewashing this? When does the whitewash review happen? And so that we make sure that we're mitigating against things like that. But I think it's continually building it into our design. Our time constructs are usually such that we don't make the time to do it. We'll get to that later, but we haven't really built it in. So I think we need to take some of the tools of the bureaucracy, such as project management, lean, all those type of things that we've been learning about, and use them for this positive outcome. And so, yes, I think it's restlessness needs to be built into the design.
I think also, if you get a curriculum and the people in your building who are white, who have been like the most silent on racial justice issues, or maybe the ones that have been anti it, and they're comfortable with that curriculum, that isn't it. That's not the curriculum you want. If people are comfortable and safe, that's not the curriculum. And also, if the curriculum is focused on trauma and trauma only, that's not the curriculum either. So, you know, I say this a lot, maybe it's because I'm in trouble a lot, but if you're not in trouble, you're not doing it. And so you're just holding up the status quo. And so one of the ways to make sure you're not just whitewashing ethnic studies is to look around you and see who is uncomfortable with this, who is getting mad, who is writing emails. And if it's the people that are upholding white supremacy in your community, in your building, then yeah, you're doing it right. If it's the BIPOC kids and the BIPOC families, then you're probably doing it wrong. So really think about, who is this curriculum privileging? What voices is it privileging? Whose safety is it privileging? Whose joy is it privileging? And that will tell you where you're at.
And I would like to just piggyback on what you just said, Rochelle, is that one of the things that I have been a part of is our PLC for the social studies and the English department. And we have some student voices on both of those, stating that the curriculum that we're doing is not appropriate, especially in the times that we're in right now. And they're asking for changes. And so it's kind of neat for me, coming from a small rural school district, to see what the other bigger school districts are doing and how some of my co-conspirators are also wanting to do that work, because that's what that's what our students are asking for. And we're doing our students a disservice by not teaching them the truth about what is out there, because we're supposed to be preparing our students for the future out there in the world. And if we keep whitewashing everything, this cycle is going to still continue on as we're on right now. And I am, you know, I'm 60 years old, and I'm just like, this got to stop. I have 2 granddaughters in school now, and I'm trying to teach them that, no, that's not the complete truth here. This is what it is. And that needs to be instilled in the classroom. So that's what I'm doing my part to do. Even though I'm a paraeducator, I'm very loud and I'm very vocal about how I do that. And student voice sometimes have to come to me in order for their voice to be heard in that. So I want them to be able to speak up and use their voice to say, hey, no, this is not right, and this is why it's not right. So giving them those tools of critical thinking on how to say what they are asking for.
I also want to piggyback on that. And I want to thank Marquita Prinzing for that question and her amazing leadership. So thank you, Marquita. I want to say that, speaking to that, how can also communities of color keep us accountable to ethnic studies? Because we know that if it is whitewashed or if it's co-opted, that's actually harmful and that it causes trauma. And so just putting that out there too.
And I actually just want to build off of something that Dr. Jones said, because that sparked an idea in me. So he was saying how we need to build continuous improvement into the system. And I just wanted to comment on that, because it really deeply does strike a lot of things within me, because hierarchy as a student to me is honestly seen as it's an enemy to improvement. It just seems like such a big barrier. And through my work with advocacy in the school district, I have seen that hierarchy is so hard to deconstruct. It's so hard to work against. So in the end, if we truly want to make a change, we really do have to work with the hierarchy. We have to work within it, and we have to work to reclaim it. Because if we don't, then we're going to be working against a system that's been so empowered over so many years, back to the history and the very time that the first person was brought across enslaved from Africa. Like, that is the moment in which those harmful hierarchies have continued to build up over and over and over again. And we have to work within them and to destroy them from within if we really do want to reclaim them.
Okay, I'm busy writing down questions too. So the last question that comes from WAESN is, how do you prevent burnout for yourself? Because y'all are educators and students of color, and it's most of us doing this work in hostile, toxic environments. So how do you prevent burnout for yourself while holding space for community?
So I'll start. I think this is really important. I think we need to celebrate the small victories early and often. I think we need to reach out to folks who are doing the heavy work and make sure that they're well nourished, that they have wellness, that there's things that they're experiencing that uplift them so that they can continue to work. I think there's, again, I'll talk a lot about intentionality and design. I think that needs to be built in. I think there needs to be someone or some people assigned to making sure that we have wellness for those who are doing these heavy lifts. As I'm thinking about it, you know, Director Hershey is doing real heavy lifts. So it's on me to make sure that he feels very much supported, and not just an emotional way, but in tangible ways as well. And so I think there's plenty of opportunities for us to lift up those, celebrate them, you know, do whatever we can to make sure that they feel honored and energized to continue to work.
You could probably tell by the face that I made that I'm not good at the self-care. It's something I'm working on, something I'm learning how to do, which is why I'm going to the healing circle next with for now. But something that the professor that I work with at the University of Washington, Dr. Anu Tarnoff, taught me, because I have cried more in the last 2 years doing, you know, really intense equity work than I have my entire 13 years of teaching. She goes, you can't always have your sensitive parts out there for people to hurt, because they will, because you are in a white space all the time, that you don't have a break. And so how do you think of ways to draw those in when you're doing this work so that you can do the work? Because if they're always out there and you're always on 10 and you're always going to pieces every time somebody hurts you, which is going to be probably 5 times a day doing this, you can't be effective. So that's something I'm working on, is learning how, when I'm doing this work, to draw those parts in. Not always, because, you know, being who we are in this work is open-hearted and our full authentic self. So not always, but there are people I trust and people I don't trust. And so people I trust get those sensitive parts, people I don't trust don't get those sensitive parts. And then something else that my colleague, Crystal Vesperis, shared with me a couple weeks ago was that you need somebody to tap you out. And so finding those people in your building that can tap you out and say, I got you, you're doing too much, I got you, let me tap you out. And she has done that for me, and I hope that I have done that for her in this space. And then we have a couple white co-conspirators who have done that for us as well. And so finding those people in your building that aren't just allies, aren't just like the white allies that like, I brought all the books and like know all the words, but will actually do the work and tap you out in that moment where you are just exhausted, is really, really important.
So I would like to add to that. This past week, we all heard the verdict on George Floyd, and my true test was who was going to check in with me. And I was overwhelmed with the co-conspirators in my building. As soon as that verdict was released, they all came knocking on my classroom door and asked, are you okay? You want to talk? Just giving me that emotional support. So I'm glad you stated that, because sometimes that's the true testimony on who's really in your corner. And, you know, and then there's some of my family members on here that I also, you know, check in on the daily. They check in. And I think that's very important for me, especially as us being BIPOC educators, because sometimes we want to be able, we know we need to do the work, but sometimes it's hard, like, oh my God, am I the only one feeling this? What's going on? But then just knowing that I can check in with my own community and they're telling me it's okay, Pam, because we're all in that battle together. So I'm very appreciative of that, and I thank God for that on the daily. So
Thank you for that, Pam. For me, I'm just really selfish with my time, and I'm really selfish with myself when it comes to making time for myself, right? Because like between teaching and then being on the school board, everybody's mom and daddy want something always, which is cool. I'm really here. I signed up for that and I'm down for it. But there are times where we need to, especially as educators of color, with all of the Black taxes and all of the brown taxes that we pay in our buildings, we need to make sure that we are actually putting that time back from that withdrawal. And for me, what that looks like is making videos about teaching. I mean, I just can't get away from it. It's been a passion that I found over the pandemic. And what that means is that I have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and make that, 90 minutes, 2 hours before I prep for my class to make sure that I'm filling myself up in that way. And art has really been a big piece of that. The other thing is also being non-negotiable about time with my family, even though it's very small right now. It's just me, my fiance, and a dog. I found that really spending intentional time with them and making that sure that I have time that is blocked out on a daily basis has kept me very full. And especially, again, as educators, as people who have been doing this work for a long time, our families, our communities become our families, right? Our communities and the people that we do the work with are our support system. And we always are making time for folks, especially in those communities, but making sure that you have the opportunity to turn off and to take a step back to recharge and replenish is critical, because if we lose people so early in this work, we're not going to replace them as quickly as we need to. So we just need to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves so that we can be in it for the long haul, because we got a lot of work to do.
Interrupting real quick, somebody wants to know if you can share the link to your videos, Brandon.
Yeah, it would be way easier if you just went to YouTube and typed in Mr. Hersey. But happy to also share a link.
I think for me, I do a lot of reflection. I reflect upon my values. And then I realize that a lot of it is just on common humanity. I do a lot of meditation every so often, and then really play around with my creative expression, that solidarity in my struggle, joy in my sorrow, what is strength in pain, and just try to think of it as almost a test of humanity, and that my experience may be one of many, and so maybe it's a solidarity in the struggle. And so even kind of communicating it right now, it gets me very emotional, right? Because I kind of think about my great-grandfather or my grandfather or my father, and then some of the things that my son goes through, right? Because we have Black hair and slanted eyes, right? Because we have darker skin, and how it's multi-generational. And so kind of thinking through that way, but finding a way to express it and for us to share it, because it's very real and it's our common humanity. And really sharing our common humanity really unpacks racism more.
Yeah, and then to wrap up this question, I think that my colleagues, if I can call you wonderful people, my colleagues, have really answered this question very well. But I want to also wrap it up with a little bit of just bringing this to just grounding this question and acknowledging something that Mr. Hersey just briefly touched on. This country itself is built on racism. And as hard as it is to accept, none of us will experience a time in our lives in which racism doesn't exist in America. And acknowledging that is the first step in preventing burnout, because it's all too easy to think that your work will help prevent racism in the space that you are currently operating in. But the truth is that it never can. But that doesn't mean that small steps, and as Dr. Jones said, appreciating those small steps and small victories aren't important. But if you burden yourself with trying to solve racism, you're going to burn out really quickly. And that's something that I've had to tell myself over and over again. Instead of trying to work to solve every single issue that exists, try to work towards small goals, small steps, and then you'll actually want to be motivated to continue to try, continue to push, because the biggest push is to get rid of racism, but it's the smaller steps that will help us get there, not in our lifetimes, not in my lifetime either, even though I'm a little younger than you guys, just a little, but it will happen maybe in a couple generations down the line sometime. It will, just with the small steps that we are helping build along the way.
Okay, I have to take a deep breath after that. We're so fortunate to have Priyanka guiding us as one of our student advisory board members. She's amazing. So you answered the questions a little bit early, which is good because we have a lot of questions from participants, and I'm going to join these two together because I feel like they go together. One was directed to Priyanka, and it says, I feel like the hierarchy is the largest barrier to student leadership. How have you been brought in as a leader and not just your voice? Many administrators and teachers need to learn how to do that authentically. And then the next one asks, could folks share some examples of successful models to actually ensure student voice is not just heard, but actually implemented? So I think the question really comes down to what's the difference between student voice and student leadership, and where are we seeing that happen?
Yeah, so I'll take the first question from Erin. This is a really tough one because I don't know if any Bellevue School District school board members are in this call right now or at this event right now, but I believe they're all great people, but the work that has gone towards anti-racism in the district on the side of the school board and on the superintendent is very lacking. And so I believe that in the Bellevue School District, I have not been brought in as a leader, and my voice has remained just a voice to be listened to, but not truly heard. As I think Pamela was saying before, my voice has been noise, but it's just noise. And I think the way that we can most authentically bring in a voice to be heard, not just listened to, is by really putting students close to positions of power and giving them power to exercise on their own. So there's a big difference between having a student representative on the school board and having a student as, I know this might seem radical, as a voting member of a school board, because high school students do have the ability and they have the rights to be able to do that. And so I think that the more that we empower students directly, not I'll listen to you and then tell the superintendent what you think, which is a lot of what has been happening in the Bellevue School District, I'm sorry to say, that is what will make us really have student leadership. Students need to be the leaders. They don't need to be the advisors. They don't need to be the voice. They need to be the leaders. And the most important way that we can do that is by giving students power to use, not by giving other people power to listen to students.
Yeah, so I think that that is exactly right. And I think just, to piggyback off something that Priyanka just mentioned, at one point in our country's history, civil rights were a radical idea. And it's having these types of conversations which is why I'm so thankful for WAESN bringing all these folks together. It's like, we need to be spending more time in spaces like this, where we have folks all throughout multiple levels of the system so that we can all be on the same page. I think a proven model for this is just listening to youth and then doing what you say you're gonna do. And by listening, that also comes with action on the other end, right? And a brief example of that, two really quick ones, was when the Seattle Public School Board ended our relationship with the Seattle Police Department. The initial ban on that was only 1 year. But thanks to the advocacy of WABLOC, Black and Brown Minds Matter, and Fee Seattle for, advocating finding 20,000 folks to sign a petition saying that we should make the ban indefinite helped us avoid an equity detour, right? Because, surprise, students know what's best for their educational experiences. I think another opportunity is where, you know, we lift up, by the leadership largely of Councilmember Zalahai, participatory budgeting processes. Those have been kind of a buzzword over the county for the past few months, and he really did lead the process in that in so many ways. But lifting that up from the school district and moving direct resources into the hands of students and their families is one of the key components to making sure that when we are pushing forward with these ideals of equity and especially ethnic studies, that we are putting our money where our mouth is and our money where our policy is as well. So
yeah, I agree with Brandon. You fund your priorities, right? And so we have all of these districts saying ethnic studies, equity, it's what we care about, but then they don't fund it. So it's not a priority. But to Priyanka's point, you can create a student equity group, but it doesn't matter if they're not actually doing anything, right? So if they're just there to talk and not have action, they see that, they understand that. They understand that they're just there as, you know, the image. So if they say, this is what we want to do, help them do it, right? And let them do it and then follow through. The actions Brandon was saying is really key. So if they say we want to propose this class, do it. Let's propose this class. If they say we want to create something that our group is working on is connections between the elementary school, middle, and high school to make that transition for our BIPOC students welcoming and start those affinity clubs. We have affinity clubs at Eastlake at a younger age so that they can carry that community through. Do it. Set that up for them. Open those doors for them if those doors won't open when they ask. But don't step out in front of them unless it's time to protect them. If you need to step out in front of them and take that bullet, you absolutely should do that. But if it's something where they are leading, let them lead. And I know that's really hard for us because many of us have grown up in a whiteness structure where control is really important. And so one of the ways to flatten that power hierarchy is you have to give up that control.
So it almost seems like then the difference between student voice and student leadership is really, do you have a decision-making power for change, right? Because a voice is that you're just saying something, but do you want to make a change and can you make a decision to make that change happen? And can you do it on your own? That's not paternalistic of the hierarchy.
Okay. We're getting a lot of similar questions, so I'm trying to figure out how I can combine them to save time. These two are similar. There's a parent that's a participant that's on the Ethnic Studies Curriculum Committee for North Shore School District, and they're trying to create an Ethnic Studies curriculum. And she says, as a parent and community member, how do I speak out and speak into decisions that are being made by predominantly white educators who are creating the framework for the curriculum? Where do people like me start, where many of us feel like we're just parents, we're not educators, and white leadership are reluctant to get bold? And then the second question that goes along with it is, how do you get whites to acknowledge racism in society without their freaking out and not engaging with ethnic studies, or worse, trying to shut ethnic studies down? So this is a lot about white leadership and the reaction of white community. So how do parents step in and make sure that it's authentic?
I think many of us are silent because when you ask the question around what white people should do, it becomes complex and difficult because BIPOC communities, BIPOC leaders have been trying to figure it out forever. And then this is the season for BIPOC members to be able to step back and ask white people to do some significant work. But in the meantime, I think we have the responsibility still as BIPOC leaders, whether we're students, educators, or administrators, to continue to point to the areas where we need to fix, in those areas that we need to sustain positive momentum, in those areas for innovation in these spaces. And so I think I think we come alongside our white brothers and sisters in their advocacy, in their allyship, and really try to be in partnership. But it's always a difficult question to ask those with the power, how are you going to utilize your power? And I think there's some, this is the season for BIPOC folks to kind of step back and have some expectations for folks to really step up.
Okay, and then Michael, who asked the question about white people who don't engage or resist, he wants to make sure that y'all know he's also thinking of white students, not just white educators and community members.
I think Priyanka has said many things that are very good, and I want to pull on a couple of them. I think when she pointed out that we are working within a system and we're working to dismantle that system from within, it's very true. And the question is, when is the time to pull these people along and get them where they need to go, and when is the time to let them go? And that is a really difficult balance. And my colleague and I taught a class on, doing this work in privileged spaces, and a lot of how we do it was through asking questions and kind of coming at it a really subversive way. We do a lesson on children's books in our class with our mostly white students that says, bring in children's books from your home. What were you reading when you were a kid? And it turns out most of them were mostly white characters, mostly male, cisgender, straight, et cetera, et cetera. And then we say, but how did that shape you, right? What did you miss out on? Who was missing? What voices are missing? And then, we show them the alternative and say, what if these were also included, these diverse books included? And we have this whole conversation about it. And it's a way to get them to understand that they all have implicit bias and that they've been socialized in a white society and in a cisgender straight society to dislike difference. And it's very effective. And so it's a way to disarm them from the beginning and talk about this thing from these tough issues that are going to make white people freak out, and in a way that keeps them from freaking out. Now, however, some people are going to freak out regardless. And I think that that's something that we have to know and be prepared for, and realize that some people are going to come with you on this journey, and some people are just not from the beginning, and you got to let them go, and you got to go straight through them, and you got to keep going, and not take those equity detours, as Brandon says, because if you're always waiting and accommodating whiteness, then again, that's not the work. And I think, again, what Priyanka said about restlessness, as a parent, you got to constantly be restless, constantly be checking in and following up with the school board, with the school, with the teachers. Have you done this? You said you were going to do this. Have you done this? What are the actual action steps? What are the actual outcomes? Because I don't see them. And that is, as a teacher, that's so helpful to me to have parents of color in particular say it's not just this really loud Black teacher in your school that is asking for these things. We are asking for these things too, because at the end of the day, the school board, in my school at least, I don't know others, doesn't listen to teachers. They don't care about us. They don't listen to us. It's like it's like we don't even exist. Who they care about are the parents. And so having parents come in and say, this is what we want, that holds weight.
Hi, and I just want to add to this whole conversation is one of the things I've taught to my folks down at Rochester on the equity team is that this is not a to-do list. Okay, let's be very clear about this. This is not something like, oh, this is the new thing, so we're just gonna do check and like, oh, I did that, so I fulfill my duty. Excuse me, this is a life journey for all of us. If you're a true educator and you're in this work, this is gonna go beyond after we're done teaching students, because on the daily, I live this life. All of us on this panel, we live this life 25/8. We don't get a chance to just go hang it up in the closet and say, oh, I did my 25 years of education, so I don't need to deal with that. It doesn't work like that. So if you're a true educator, this goes across all ethnicity on this call, or even where we're at, this is something you need to be doing even after you leave the profession. I'm sorry, this is just life journey. This this is the blood that is going to flow through what we're doing in life. So I just want to put that out there because I know for a fact that all of us are on this call, especially on this panel, this is what we're going to do because this is what we have to do. And this is our life journey. So I just want to be very clear that this is not for us a to-do checklist. This is what we do on the daily.
All right, thank you. I don't know how much experience we have on this call with elementary school, but there's a couple of questions about what this looks like at elementary school. I know, Brandon, there you go. How do you encourage student voice at the elementary level so that when those students reach the secondary level, they already have a foundation of feeling empowered and ready to get involved when they're there? And what does this look like at elementary?
I'm just going to dive on in. Yes. Oh my God. Thank you for that question. I think that that's a gigantic misstep on systems everywhere, is that we don't do enough for K-5. And the best way to do it is just to tell kids the truth, because surprisingly, they already know everything already, right? Because I grew up in the 90s. So I didn't have access to the internet until I was like almost a man. And all of our kids have cell phones in their backpacks and in their pockets and everywhere else. And so the thing is, they are already going to find out their truth anyway. And so we might as well be a part of helping them frame that. Kids today have access to anything they want to know. You thinking that not engaging with a child in a specific conversation is like balancing their development is BS, right? Let that thought go, because they're going to go find it somewhere. The thing is that we have to take an active role by just treating them like the young people that they are and telling them the truth and having honest, legitimate conversations with them, right? Because they can handle it, which is why when we are like, say during Black History Month, for example, we could be teaching our second graders, and I try to make a practice of teaching them more than just boycotts, buses, and basketballs, right? Because our history is more than just the trauma that people have access to and how to articulate, kinda. But I think one of the biggest pieces of that is understanding that when we are teaching babies about this, their context is already there. For example, when I started teaching in 2016, every student in my class, regardless if they were white or Black or what, the only president that they had ever known was a Black man. Let that sink in. The only president that my students had ever known could be a president at age 8 in 2016 was a Black man. That context deserves so much conversation that we just don't have access, and we don't have the language necessary to have with them. And the only way we are going to develop it is to try and make mistakes, because we have to be able to expect the same thing of ourselves as we expect from our students, to come in ready to learn, have a growth mindset, and to get your hands dirty while you're trying to figure it out. And if we're not prepared and willing to do that, then we can't ask that of our students in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and I just want to harp on that point a lot that Mr. Hearsay just brought up. I think that it's really important to acknowledge that students they know so much more than you probably give them credit for. I actually got my start in ethnic studies advocacy through my mentor, Daryl Sushigi, who is a fourth grade teacher at Cherry Crest Elementary School in the Bellevue School District. And I went and visited their class yesterday, actually, and guess what they were talking about? Fourth graders were talking about race-based redlining. Fourth graders. That is so cool. And they were getting it. They knew exactly what was happening. It's not like they were overwhelmed at all. They were just learning about something that they had to learn about. And the class also was very racially diverse. White kids were learning about it. Black kids were learning about it. Asian kids were learning about it. They all were learning about that one very important topic. And to me, that showed how aware and conscious elementary school kids are. Fourth and fifth grade is the age to get involved in anti-racism, because students are so aware. When I was in second grade, I noticed that racism was a thing in my school district when my teacher called a peach-colored crayon skin color. That's when I realized that those systems are so embroiled in our education system, and I truly don't want anyone who is listening to this call here today to write off the abilities of fourth graders, of 8-year-olds, of 7-year-olds. They know what's going on, and their voice is just as powerful. And just as important to value as my voice as a 17-year-old.
And I also think in elementary, as you're building that background knowledge to as you're knowing your kids, knowing your students, you are tapping into that cultural references, the cultural context, because you're building that background knowledge of your kids. And so that's where it starts at culture responsive teaching. And so I do think it kind of starts there as well too.
And I think it's also important to remember that our kids are not blank slates. I think all of us on this panel can remember the first time we were raised, right? I was 8 when I was called the N-word for the first time, 8, right? By a white girl. So both of us had a racial experience there in that moment. And I had no teacher, no education on this until I got to college, right? I lived that experience and then being called the N-word over and over and over again my entire school career until I got to college, right? And at home, my mom could unpack that for me, absolutely. But then I was back out into this world, right? So it's so important. Our kids are not blank slates. So how are we helping them endure this trauma that they are going to experience? And if we're thinking, oh, well, they don't know anything, they need to be so innocent. Again, who are you privileging there? Who gets to be innocent and who doesn't? Who loses that innocence at a very young age?
Okay, we're almost out of time and I can't open up the breakout sessions until I end this session. So I want to say there's a few more questions in here that we're not going to get to because we don't have time. One is about shifting our theories of change so that we're not talking about production, and that's where the standards conversation comes in, right? Because standards is all about producing. It's all about saying we're done, we accomplished this. And what I'm hearing from you all say is that's not ethnic studies. That's not culturally responsive pedagogy. And then there's a question about the link between capitalism and racism. And I know that a lot of neoliberal reform comes from capitalist pressure. So how do we avoid that when we're implementing ethnic studies? And another question is preventing teachers unions from protecting harmful racist teachers. So if that's your question, go to the white supremacy and union organizing breakout. And then another question is, what are we doing to recruit, protect, and maintain BIPOC teachers, which is the topic of my dissertation. So I'm happy to talk to anybody about that. Unfortunately, we don't have any breakouts on that today, but yeah, I could talk about that all day and cite sources and everything. So I want to thank everybody for the panel. It's recorded and it will go up on YouTube sometime tonight or tomorrow morning when I have time to edit it and upload it. I'm taking a deep breath because my texts have been blowing up in the chat, talk about how amazing y'all are, especially Priyanka. And the sense of like a weight being lifted off with Dr. Jones coming into Seattle in May, like it's so refreshing to have you here and have you part of the community that we have not received in the past couple of years. So thank you, everybody for joining us today. And I have to end right now. I'm going to go open up some of the other links so you can join your breakout room. So again, to the facilitators, give us a few minutes for a transition time. And then, like I said, at the end of breakout 3, we're finished. So make sure you get that contact information of folks that you want to connect with. And there will be a hard stop at 3 p.m. because Amanda's going to call y'all back into the main room. So just to let you know that too. Thank you, everybody.
Tracy, yeah. I just want to say debt of gratitude to you for your diligence and your perseverance for making this all happen. You've been at the forefront of this. You conceptualized it and you've sustained it. So just want to say that publicly. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Ditto. The feeling is mutual. Okay, see you in the breakout.